At one time, it was home to Petronelli Brothers Gym, where on the third floor, the champ, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and other boxers would train.
The terrible tragedy of Marvelous Marvin Hagler sent shockwaves through the entire sports world, a heartbreaking reminder of the hidden struggles that accompany fame. Marvelous Marvin Hagler was the true definition of untouchable and mental toughness. From the rough streets of Newark to the blinding lights of Las Vegas, Hagler's journey inspired millions. But behind the fame and championship belts was a fight no one really saw, a silent battle that ended in a way no true champion deserves. What really went on behind the scenes? Join us in this video as we unravel the terrible details. The terribly heartbreaking tragedy of Marvelous Marvin. After years of dominating the middleweight division, Marvin Hagler finally faced the biggest challenge of his career on April 6, 1987, Sugar Ray Leonard. Leonard, boxing's golden boy, was coming out of retirement after 3 years away due to a serious eye injury. He was still one of the most beloved and recognizable figures in sports, smooth, charismatic, adored by fans and the media. Marvin, on the other hand, was the tough, no-nonsense blue-collar fighter who had clawed his way to respect. Now, everything he had worked for was on the line. The fight wasn't just a battle, it was a spectacle. Leonard knew better than to go toe-to-toe with Marvin. So he used his speed and footwork to his advantage. He'd jump in, land a quick combo, and jump out before Marvin could land anything solid. Marvin, ever the warrior, stalked him around the ring, looking for chances to land his power punches. For 12 rounds, it was a chess match. Leonard danced and dazzled for the crowd. Marvin kept coming forward, fighting like a man determined to win. He controlled the ring, dictated the pace, and landed the heavier blows. When the final bell rang, most people thought Marvin had done enough. Even Leonard looked unsure. Then came the decision. A split decision win for Sugar Ray Leonard. The arena erupted in disbelief. Commentators were shocked. Headlines the next day called it highway robbery. Just like that, years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice seemed to vanish. The moment that should have crowned Marvin's legacy instead marked the beginning of the end. Marvin Hagler, the man who had faced every challenger and never backed down, didn't lose that night because he was beaten in the ring. He lost on the scorecards. Promoter Bob Arum later recalled, "I went over to Marvin and said, 'Ray's talking about a rematch.' Marvin just shot him a cold glare and said, 'Tell Ray to get a life.' The pain was too deep. This wasn't just a loss on paper. It felt like a betrayal. For a man who had spent his whole career being overlooked, this was the final insult. And so, at just 32 years old, Marvin Hagler walked away from boxing. Not because of age, not because of injury, but because his heart had been broken. He had given everything to the sport, only to have his legacy taken from him by judges, by politics, by favoritism. Many still say it was one of the most controversial decisions in boxing history. That's the true tragedy of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He didn't lose his belts in the ring. He lost them to a system he couldn't fight. After leaving boxing, where did the waves of life steer him? Let's see. Life after boxing. When Marvin retired in 1987, he didn't just leave boxing, he left America. He felt betrayed, not just by the sport, but by the whole system that had stolen his final moment. So he moved to Italy, looking for peace and a fresh start. And he found it. In Italy, Marvin embraced a whole new life. He learned to speak fluent Italian, dove into the culture, and lived with a calm and joy that had long eluded him in the ring. "I feel fortunate to get out of the ring with my faculties and my health," he said a year after retiring, aware that many fighters aren't so lucky. He also found a new passion. Away from the spotlight of boxing, Marvin never stopped pushing himself. But he never turned his back on the sport either. He stayed deeply connected, as a mentor, as a fan, and as a respected voice. He regularly attended major fights, offering sharp insights only someone of his experience could give. Young fighters looked up to him, not just because of what he'd accomplished, but because he was always willing to share his wisdom. Marvin knew how much boxing had given him, and he made it a point to give back. He mentored up-and-coming fighters, helping shape the next generation. His quiet guidance and example had a lasting impact. His influence in the sport didn't stop when he hung up his gloves. Outside of boxing, Marvin also gave his time and energy to charity, especially causes focused on youth and sports development. He used his fame to make real change in communities, showing the same heart outside the ring that had defined him inside it. In Italy, he finally found the peace he had long been denied. Away from the noise, the lights, the expectations, Marvin enjoyed the quiet life. He embraced simple joys, delicious meals, breathtaking views, and time with the people he loved. It was the perfect ending for a warrior who had spent years in battle. What was Marvin's personal life like? Did he have romance and bliss? Let's find out. Marvelous Marvin's personal life. Outside the spotlight of the boxing world, Marvelous Marvin Hagler lived a life rich with love, family, and new beginnings. He had 5 children with his first wife, a relationship that began when they were still teenagers. Their marriage lasted about 10 years before they went their separate ways in 1980. Years later, in May 2000, Marvin found love again. He married Kay Guerrera, an Italian woman, in a small ceremony in Pioltello, Italy. The couple made their home in Milan, where they lived peacefully until Marvin's passing in 2021. Kay remained by his side as he explored life beyond boxing. His children, Marvin Jr., James, Gentry, Celeste, and Sherelle, were always important to him, even as his career took him across the globe. After hanging up his gloves, Hagler didn't just slow down, he reinvented himself. He moved to Italy and stepped into acting, appearing in several Italian action films that let him showcase his charisma and adaptability. But Marvin's story didn't end with fame. He was deeply committed to giving back. He supported youth programs, often visiting schools and community centers to encourage young people to make positive choices and avoid trouble. He worked with charities that focused on helping disadvantaged children and families. Even in retirement, he stayed close to the sport he loved, hosting boxing workshops and clinics for young fighters, often donating the proceeds to local causes. Marvin Hagler wasn't just a champion inside the ring, he was a champion for his community. His impact went far beyond boxing, and the legacy he left behind is one of heart, humility, and hope. Marvelous Marvin Hagler was a force in the ring, finishing his career with 67 fights, 62 wins, 52 by knockout, only 3 losses, and 2 draws. His dominance wasn't just in numbers, but in how he dismantled opponents with relentless precision. From his controversial split decision loss to Sugar Ray Leonard in 1987 to the brutal war against Thomas Hearns in 1985, widely hailed as one of the greatest fights in boxing history, Hagler consistently proved his greatness. He stopped John Mugabe, went the distance with Roberto Duran, and outclassed names like Alan Minter, Tony Sibson, Juan Roldan, and Mustafa Hamsho. Rising from small local bouts in New England to becoming the undisputed middleweight champion for over 6 years, Hagler never backed down from a challenge and beat every major name in his division. His 62 victories, most by knockout, and his no-nonsense fighting style etched his name permanently into boxing's legacy. Marvin Hagler wasn't just a champion, he was truly marvelous. The biggest shock of the world for Marvelous Marvin was now brewing. What was it? Keep watching to find out. Marvelous Marvin Hagler's heartbreaking end. It was the shock of the age. No one saw it coming because Marvelous had been full of life. This happened on March 13, 2021, devastating the boxing world. Marvelous Marvin Hagler, the iron-willed champion, the symbol of toughness and pride, had passed away suddenly at his home in New Hampshire. He was just 66. The man who had stood toe-to-toe with legends, who had endured years of punishment and never broken, was gone in an instant. His wife, Kay, shared the heartbreaking news on social media. And for the first time in decades, the boxing world was left without one of its greatest warriors. On that day, the world lost a legend. Today, unfortunately, my beloved husband, Marvelous Marvin, passed away unexpectedly at our home in New Hampshire, his wife Kay shared in a statement. Our family kindly asks for privacy during this difficult time. The news hit like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just that Marvin had died, it was how suddenly it happened. He seemed healthy. He was still showing up at boxing events, still sharing his love for the sport, still flashing that familiar quiet strength. But then, out of nowhere, a heart attack took him. An ordinary ending to an extraordinary life. His passing shook the boxing world to its core. Fellow members of the iconic Four Kings era, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran, all paid tribute to their old rival and friend. Leonard spoke with emotion about Marvin's character, calling him a fierce competitor, but also a man of deep integrity. Even outside the boxing world, the grief was heavy. Joe Rogan, a longtime fan, was visibly emotional when he spoke about Marvin on his podcast. His voice cracked, and in that raw moment, he captured what so many fans were feeling. This wasn't just the loss of a great fighter. It was the loss of someone who embodied everything that made boxing beautiful. Grit, discipline, pride, and heart. What made it all so much harder to accept was that Marvin had finally reached a place of peace. After a career filled with wars in the ring and battles outside it for respect, Marvin had walked away on his own terms. He had built a quiet, joyful life in Italy. He was proud of what he'd accomplished. He had nothing left to prove. And just like that, he was gone. From the tough streets of Newark to the roaring lights of Las Vegas, Marvin Hagler never stopped fighting. He chased his dreams with a warrior's heart, and he made us believe that anything was possible if you worked hard enough for it. Following his death, the Marvin Hagler Memorial Fund was established to carry on his mission with a special focus on youth empowerment and education. Though gone, his legacy lives on. So how did Marvelous Marvin Hagler become such a legend? How did life shape him? Keep watching to find out. The Making of a Champion, Marvelous Marvin's Early Life and Career. Marvin Hagler was born on May 23, 1954, in Newark, New Jersey. From a young age, life demanded toughness. His family lived in a rough neighborhood where danger lurked and money was scarce. Then came the Newark riots in 1967. After that chaos, Marvin's family packed up and moved to Brockton, Massachusetts, chasing hope and safety. No one knew it at the time, but that move would change boxing history. In Brockton, young Marvin walked into a gym that would shape his future, run by two brothers, Goody and Pat Petronelli. They noticed him immediately. There was something in the way he trained, fierce, focused, relentless. They saw fire in his eyes. And Marvin? He wasn't just training, he was living it. "If they cut my bald head open," Hagler once said, "they'd find one big boxing glove. That's all I am. I live it." Marvin Hagler didn't just talk about boxing, he lived it. Every breath, every moment, every decision revolved around the ring. That obsession, that unshakable drive, would one day make his fall feel even more tragic. But his path to greatness wasn't smooth. Marvin's amateur career began with a string of losses that could have broken anyone else, yet each defeat only made him tougher, hungrier. Under the guidance of the Petronelli brothers, he learned that boxing wasn't just about fists. It was about grit, heart, and refusing to quit. These early struggles now feel even heavier, knowing how much he overcame to become marvelous. What set Marvin apart wasn't just his southpaw stance or his granite chin, it was his complete devotion. While other kids played or partied, he was locked in the gym, day after day, sharpening his mind and body. He built himself into a fighter who was nearly impossible to beat, not just physically, but mentally. And that's what makes his tragic ending so devastating, because here was a man who fought for everything, and still couldn't control how it all ended. When he turned pro in 1973 and knocked out Terry Ryan in round 2, no one imagined they were witnessing the start of a legend. But that legend had to claw his way to the top. The worst part of his early career wasn't losing, it was being overlooked. Promoters and top fighters saw him as too dangerous and not famous enough to bother with. High risk, low reward. So they dodged him. He wasn't just fighting opponents, he was fighting to be seen. And that long, lonely road to recognition makes his story all the more painful in hindsight. How did fame come to Marvelous Marvin? Let's see. Marvelous Marvin's troubled rise to fame. That pain, being denied the shot he worked so hard for, was the first crack in a heartbreaking journey that would follow Marvin Hagler long after he hung up his gloves. The rejection cut deep, but it didn't break him. It fueled him. "I'll fight anybody," he'd say. "I don't care where or when." And he meant it. Marvin spent years grinding it out in small venues, facing tough opponents far from the spotlight, slowly building his name. But even as he won fans with his fists and fire, the politics of boxing kept pushing him down, denying him the respect he had already earned. That injustice became part of his fight. He wasn't just battling other fighters. He was fighting a system that refused to acknowledge him. The world finally began to take notice when Marvin faced Vito Antuofermo on November 30th, 1979, for the WBA and WBC middleweight titles. Most people believed Marvin clearly won, but in a gut-wrenching twist, the judges called it a draw. He walked away without the belts, but the fight proved he belonged among the elite. That moment captured the heartbreak of his career, how, even when he gave everything, boxing didn't always give back. Still, Marvin didn't wallow. He took that bitter pill and turned it into motivation. Less than a year later, on September 27, 1980, he went to London and demolished Alan Minter in just 3 rounds, finally claiming the undisputed middleweight championship of the world. That victory wasn't just about the title. It was Marvin shouting to the world that the years of being ignored were over. He had clawed his way to the top, and he had no intention of ever stepping down. And yet, knowing what came after, Marvin Hagler's greatest triumph feels even more heartbreaking. Because the real tragedy is that even after reaching the mountaintop, peace never truly followed. Once he became champion, Hagler entered what fans now call the Warrior's Reign, a 7-year stretch where he defended his middleweight titles with terrifying intensity. His first defense came in January 1981 against Fulgencio Obelmejias, ending in a technical knockout, and it was just the beginning of a legendary run. But what made Marvin's reign unforgettable wasn't just the wins, it was how he won. With his shiny bald head under the lights, his unorthodox southpaw stance, and his raw, punishing power, he was a nightmare in the ring. Yet, behind all that dominance was a man fighting for more than just victory. He was battling for respect. Marvin believed, even as champion, that fans and promoters still didn't see his worth. That constant feeling of being undervalued fueled him. Every time he was passed over, every snub, every dismissive headline, it only made him hungrier. He fought with fire in his chest and a chip on his shoulder, determined to prove he wasn't just good, he was great. The emotional toll of being overlooked again and again gave his story a haunting depth. In fact, the disrespect cut so deep that in 1982, when he wasn't introduced by his nickname Marvelous before a fight, he went to court and legally changed his name to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. It was more than a nickname. It was a statement, a way of taking back control, of forcing the world to acknowledge what he had always known, that he wasn't just a champion, he was something truly special. Did the spotlight and attention finally come? How much longer could he take the unfair treatment? Keep watching to find out. The fight to be seen. Marvelous Marvin's worst days as a star. It was a bold move, but also a quiet plea to be seen. Even as Marvin Hagler crushed opponents with ease, he was still fighting for recognition. His promoter, Bob Arum, once said, "He was certainly one of the greatest middleweights ever, and one of the greatest people I've ever been around. He was a real man, loyal, and just a fantastic person." And the fans didn't just admire Marvin for his character, they saw him as a relentless force in the ring. During his reign as champion, he defended his title 12 times, often in dominant, highlight reel fashion. He dismantled top-tier contenders like Juan Domingo Roldan and Mustafa Hamsho, each win adding another brick to his growing legacy. Fight after fight, he showcased an extraordinary mix of explosive power, sharp intelligence, and pure grit. The boxing world finally began to understand that they weren't just watching another champion, they were witnessing a warrior unlike any other. But looking back, this stretch of dominance carries a quiet sadness. Even at the height of his powers, Marvin was still battling invisibility. The real heartbreak wasn't just in how his story ended. It was in how much he had to fight just to matter, even when he was at the top. His toughest opponents weren't always in the ring, and as he entered the next chapter, the era of the Four Kings, those invisible battles only grew heavier. The 1980s ushered in one of boxing's most electrifying chapters, uniting four legendary fighters: Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran. Together, they became known as the Four Kings. And what made this era unforgettable was the fact that they all actually stepped into the ring to face one another. No ducking, no dodging, just pure heart, skill, and legacy on the line. In today's boxing world, top fighters often dance around each other, guarding their undefeated records like trophies. But the Four Kings, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran, weren't built that way. They weren't chasing comfort or padding their legacies. They were chasing greatness, no matter the cost. Each one brought something unique to the ring. Sugar Ray had charisma, and lightning-fast hands that made him a star from the start. Hearns, the hitman from Detroit, had a brutal right hand and knockout power that could flatten anyone. Duran, the brawler from Panama, was pure fire, fearless, raw, and relentless. And then there was Marvin, the underdog, the outsider. While the others rose quickly under the spotlight, Marvin had to claw his way up the hard way, grinding in brutal gym wars and taking dangerous fights with little reward. The fame and money flowed to the others, but Marvin, despite his dominance, often stood in the shadows. That double standard stung. While the other kings basked in media attention and million-dollar paydays, Marvin was still fighting to be seen. The lack of recognition wasn't just unfair, it was personal. It hurt, but it also hardened him. It made him even more dangerous. He knew he had to be better than everyone else just to earn the respect they were given freely. As boxing analyst Larry Merchant put it, for all his greatness, he was a sensitive, gracious man outside the ring. But once the fight started, he became a force of destruction. Every punch Marvin threw seemed to carry the weight of every slight, every rejection, every moment he'd been overlooked. And that fire, the pain, the pride, the hunger, helped fuel some of the most unforgettable battles the sport has ever seen during the legendary Four Kings era. What went down in the Four Kings? Would his star eventually shine there? Let's see. What went down in the Four Kings? The fight between the Four Kings wasn't just thrilling, it brought out the absolute best in every fighter. But for Marvin Hagler, these battles meant even more. They weren't just about winning titles or defending pride. They were about proving, once and for all, that he belonged at the top. These fights were his answer to a world that had doubted him for years, and that's what makes his story so deeply heartbreaking. Then came the night that changed everything. April 15, 1985, the war. At Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Hagler stepped into the ring against Thomas "Hitman" Hearns in what many still call the greatest 8 minutes in boxing history. This wasn't just a fight, it was pure, unfiltered violence. The build-up had been intense, a 23-city promotional tour that turned mutual respect into real animosity. Marvin showed up with a cap that said "War," and he meant every letter. When the bell rang, they both charged like wild bulls. Hearns landed a monstrous right hand that would have dropped almost anyone, but Marvin just kept coming, unfazed. Hearns hit him with a really good right hand with as much as he had, analyst Al Bernstein recalled, and Hagler walked through it. I knew the fight would be over soon after that. But then, disaster struck. Hearns opened a deep cut above Marvin's right eye. Blood streamed down his face. The ref paused the fight to check the cut, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like it might be stopped. This was Marvin's worst fear, not losing in battle, but being robbed by a technicality. When they stopped the fight to look at the cut, Marvin later said, I realized they might be playing games, and I wasn't going to let them take the title away. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was survival. It was everything he'd ever fought for on the line. Later, Marvin Hagler would recall the moment with chilling honesty. It was a scary feeling. I thought, why are they stopping this fight? I didn't realize I was bleeding. It wasn't in my eyes. Then I knew. I had to destroy this guy. And that's exactly what he did. Despite the blood streaming down his face, Marvin came out in the third round like a man possessed. He launched a brutal flurry of punches that dropped Hearns to the canvas. And just like that, it was over. In less than 8 minutes, Marvin had carved his name into boxing history with blood, grit, and unshakable willpower. Promoter Bob Arum put it simply, Marvin willed himself to victory. "That was an unbelievable fight," Arum said, "probably the greatest fight ever." Even Hearns, years later, had nothing but respect. "I can't take anything away from him. His awkwardness messed me up. He fought his heart out. We put on a great show for all time." It should have been Marvin's ultimate moment of vindication, but as fate would have it, even after that legendary triumph, the tragedy of his story was far from over. What more punches and unfair treatment could life throw? Keep watching to find out. Fighting harder. His next test came from another icon, Roberto Duran, the legendary Manos de Piedra, or Hands of Stone. On November 10, 1983, at Caesar's Palace, Marvin stepped into the ring again, but this wasn't going to be another short war like the Hearns fight. This was something different, a long, punishing chess match. Duran wasn't just a slugger, he was a crafty, seasoned master of the ring, a fighter who had been going toe-to-toe with the best since his teenage years. With iron resolve, slick defense, and the heart of a street-born warrior, Duran would push Marvin in ways no opponent had before, not with brute force, but with skill, patience, and sheer mental toughness. What made Roberto Duran so dangerous wasn't just his skill. It was his refusal to quit, no matter how much punishment he took. His fight with Marvin Hagler turned into a high-stakes chess match that spanned all 15 rounds, with both men digging deep into their arsenals. Duran used slick movement, defensive tricks, and veteran savvy to frustrate Marvin, while Hagler stayed locked in, marching forward with relentless pressure. It was a battle of styles, finesse versus force, that kept fans glued to every second. But what truly made this fight matter wasn't just the tactics or the endurance, it was what it revealed about Marvin's character. Duran became the first opponent to take Hagler the full distance in a title defense. Lesser fighters might have panicked or made costly mistakes, but not Marvin. He stayed composed, adjusted as the rounds unfolded, and let his legendary conditioning take over. While Duran began to fade, Marvin only got stronger, pressing harder, landing more punches, and controlling the final rounds with grit and intelligence. When the final bell rang, Hagler had earned a unanimous decision, not just a win, but a statement. He proved that he wasn't just a destroyer. He was a complete fighter, capable of adapting to any style, surviving deep waters, and outthinking his opponents. He was extremely vulnerable in that fight multiple times, and he got through it, said analyst Al Bernstein. To me, that's the true measure of Hagler. And yet, despite this extraordinary performance, the media barely gave it the spotlight it deserved. In an era where flash sold more headlines than grit, Marvin's quiet brilliance was often overlooked. And that, too, was part of the tragedy, that even at the peak of his powers, Marvin Hagler never quite received the full credit he had fought so hard to earn. What do you think made Marvin Hagler so special? And which of his legendary battles do you believe best defines his legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.